Test. Oh yeah, looks like I'm good. Okay. I'm Phil Wyman, and this is the Wild Theology podcast, where the world, the humans in it, and God are all wilder than we've been told.
That's your intro.
So, you'll get philosophy and theology and crazy stories that come from 30 years of pastoring,
Boring.
20 years of festival work,
Whatever.
and the mud and blood of wrestling with the living in spaces angels fear to tread.
Ooh, trying to sound interesting, are we? Yeah, you think you got something to say?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the problem, dimwit.
Look, I'm a lot smarter than you think.
Yeah, you tightened your shoes this morning.
Whatever. We're Phil Wyman, and this is Wild Theology, where you get to argue with your own ideas.
And lose.
That's the point. We appear to live in a world of increasing social and intellectual tension. Topics such as politics, religion, climate change, race and ethnicity, sexuality and gender, and even categories such as medicine and food choices are categories filled with violent disagreements between opposing positions. One side of an argument believes the other is immoral, and another believes the opposing position is stupid. It is my belief that our inability to dialogue civilly with our neighbors on the most important topics in life has dramatic ramifications for our personal relationships, our culture, and even our personal mental health. This short series focuses upon the tension and is called The Space Between Us.
In the second part of The Space Between Us, we're going to get particularly nerdy, and we're going to talk about parallaxis. You might think about parallaxis as the lines emanating from a central point, and we would be living somewhere on those lines, looking inside at that point, or at a specific object from our different perspectives. Parallaxis is the difference in the apparent position of an object when viewed from different points. It is a perceived displacement, but not an actual relocation of the viewed object. Astronomers use parallax lines to measure the distance of stars from the Earth. When the Earth is on one side of the Sun, measurements are made. In an opposite season, on the other side of the Sun, more measurements are taken. Distance is determined using trigonometric calculations with the angle created by the inclination of the two lines of sight to the star. Parallax is used in rifle scopes, binoculars, and optical sensors. Our own two eyes work on parallax, and the fact that we have the two lines of sight gives us this sense of distance we call depth perception. This complication of the parallaxis existing outside of me, by that I mean the disparity of opinions in community, and the parallaxis existing inside of me, and by that I mean my own disparate and competing, oftentimes confusing experiences. These two things create significant existential complications. You see the exterior of the mask of my opinions, but I see this same fearsome mask upon myself, and even as I become a monster to you, I become a monster to me. The monstrous mask of human experience creates an unholy war at every level, within ourselves, with our lovers, with our family, with our occupations, with our neighbors, with our country, with our world, and even with our God. You and I perceive abstract issues like love, politics, or religion from our own intellectual and emotional points of view. My opinion on any potential subject is in parallax with any other person's point of view. Like the straight lines from outside of a circle into its center, these lines never touch until they reach the center point. But to further complicate this issue, they never actually touch because we are viewing a different side of an object against a different background, and the face of the object itself blocks the point of linear intersection. The last time we talked, we looked at the parable of Lazarus and the rich man. The parable of Lazarus and the rich man highlights the lonely cry of isolation. A great gap allowed the lonely cry, and only the lonely cry, to pass to Abraham's ears from the burning tongue of the rich man, isolated in his place of torment. The infinite space between our points of reference leaves us on a spot in the universe all alone. No other person can think my thoughts with me. Even the voicing of my thoughts is an incomplete act. How often I struggle to say the right thing in the right way. How often I fight to be heard for what I mean and not what somebody else thinks I have said. My point of view becomes the fixed location of my isolation. And in this isolation, my voice echoes across the great gap. It is the only reference others have for my location in this universe of thought. Zeno's paradox illustrates how debates with one another exaggerate the infinite distance between us. Zeno's paradox, if you remember, is that paradox of never being able to reach a point because we always have to go halfway first, but there are always an infinite number of halfway points. And that paradox finds us without resolution to our arguments, not being able to come to agreement with one another, but by conceding through apologies or agreeing to disagree. Our necessary concessions are the proof that in our worldview we stand alone, we remain isolated from fully understanding others, and others fully understanding us. When we do not reach gracious concessions, topics such as religion and politics become taboo. Politicians, CEOs, and preachers have made a profession arguing against the evil other, and have often created their own isolation, which we call, quote, the lonely whine of the top dog. But neighbors, longtime friends, and even family members are handicapped by the impossible struggle of isolation. To relieve ourselves from this tension in family settings, we create taboos, untouchable, infinitely distant categories. In these tabooed topics of non-discussion, we have set our boundaries for establishing peace. But the isolating factor always remains. The elephant is in the room and sometimes goes on a rampage. So it is that we find ourselves dreading the visit to the family, when our hearts desire that family times would be a tension-free joy. We discover instead that they are taboo-ridden circuses. Social media provides us with a daily dose of this sense of isolation. On Facebook, people friend and unfriend one another with the speed of quickly and poorly written updates and comments. Politics, religion, and social justice issues are primary sources for tension. I have personal friends who are good friends with one another in face-to-face interaction, but have unfriended one another on Facebook because they can't contain their apparent need to respond to the objects of their disagreement. I have friends who are married to one another who have unfriended or unfollowed one another on Facebook and Twitter for similar reasons. The quick response, unmediated activity of social media provides us with a 140-character example of the isolation of our points of reference. We can't even become friends with our friends. Religion, once the community standard of stability and comfort, is now a source of isolation for many people. The face of religion has gazed back at us. At times it has demanded the impossible. It has betrayed, it is abused, and the comfort we once experienced seems impossibly distant. Even that which I love most becomes the stranger. It distances itself from me and gazes back at me, demanding the impossible from me. Is this intrinsic to the phenomena of deadly fundamentalism that requires the sacrifice of my own life as the expression of my faithfulness, a faith whose love embraces me with a suicide bomber's vest?
Thanks for tuning in. I'm Phil Wyman, and that was the Wild Theology Podcast. Hope to see you again next time.
Right. You think anybody's going to check in with you again? weekend.
Well, yeah, pretty engaging, I think.
Right, well, I think they're only listening in for that ambient music in the background by David Gerard.
Well, they can find it by going to ambientism.bandcamp.com, and they can get some of it for themselves.
That's the only redeemable thing they've gotten today.
Yeah, whatever.